Okay, thank you, Jane. Thanks for coming. I must begin with an apology because even to the most ardent admirers of all questions ethical, this is not, I imagine, a particularly exciting title to speak to, so apologies for that. So if the main aim of the project is to find out what constitutes the ethics of built environment research, my role is to begin to map out the discourse of research ethics within UCL and beyond. And this material raises issues within 6 key areas, from policy to philosophy, so that's what I'm going to talk to you. That since I whiz over necessarily vast and quite complex bodies of literature, I'm going to make available all the documents to which I refer, adding key questions and quotes to this crowdsourced bibliography that's available online. Okay, so first to policy, and like other institutions, UCL's ethics stem from 2 things. A commitment to uphold its own vision, values and guiding principles as articulated in this mission statement, which is very good and inspiring, alongside an adherence to national and international frameworks on research integrity, and this is what Jane spoke to before. So only Denmark and Norway have research integrity established by law. So our non-regulatory approach instead promotes ethics as an inherent part of professional practice. So this second commitment in the UK Concordat emphasises this. So UCL's internal codes of conduct are all actually designed to be read in conjunction with other external documents, either these national and international frameworks, which understandably mainly address the global scientific community, or relevant professional organisations and societies. UCL lists 20 of these societies and organisations, from the Anthropological Association to World Medical Association, but slightly predictably no reference to built environment bodies. So if we were to rectify this omission from UCL, well, actually looking to UK bodies provides quite a mixed picture. In the Code of Conduct for the Architects Registration Board, we find what Jeremy Till has described as the most tragic definition of ethics of all, which sets out, in his opinion, no values or standards of behaviour beyond anodyne contractual relationships with other professionals. The Royal Institute of British Architects is always as self-protecting, stating its 3 principles as honesty, integrity and competency, as well as a concern for others and for the environment, which seems a bit secondary. And these principles are repeated actually verbatim by most of the other built environment bodies, but they offer far more substantive and quite stirring policy. So the Royal Town Planning Institute ensures members can act fearlessly and impartially exercise their independent professional judgment, which seems like something that's very worthy. The Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors provides members with and regulated firms with a conceptual framework as part of their supporting information to help with the decision-making process, which also seems very useful and something we can do with. And the Institute for Civil Engineers stresses an overriding responsibility to the public good, which includes care and respect for humanity's cultural, historical and archaeological heritage, to protect the health and well-being of present and future generations and show due regard for the environment and the sustainable management of natural resources. So all of these actually go far further than architecture bodies. And here ethics seems to move beyond sort of individual contractual arrangements to collective consequences. Okay, what about procedure? UCL's ethics procedures are written with clarity, that seem to provide quite inaccurate templates to how built environment research is actually made. For example, the Bartlett faculty manual reprints UCL's sort of general ethical guidelines, again, which are mainly oriented towards science and medicine-based disciplines. For example, they recommend all research proposals involving living human participants require ethical approval. They also recommend following UCL data protection guidelines. So, for example, in site photographs, any person featured, including members of the public, should be informed of the nature of research and consent to their personal information being used, which is something that probably can't actually be done in practice. So students and staff in built environment disciplines may find these procedures and application forms so stringent or ill-fitting in their sort of one-size-fits-all approach that they may seem burdensome or, at worst, irrelevant. Governance is the most parochial and knotty area, and Jane's already shown this organogram. So I'm just going to simply point to the fact that neither of the two nominated academic staff members in the Research Governance Committee from the Built Environment, Engineering Sciences, Mathematical and Physical Sciences academic unit are actually from the built environment. So it seems like this is something that could be improved. So halfway through our list, and I think you'll agree there's probably work to be done, the good news is many gifted people are on the case from within and beyond the Bartlett. And this project's actually playing an important role, especially in guidance. So other events in the series of talks have encouraged staff and students to share their perspectives, experiences and guidance through different seminars. And for inspiration, we can all turn to actually quite excellent external initiatives that provide discipline-specific ethical guides, case studies, short films, podcasts and resources to help researchers with ethical challenges. For example, the Just Space, a group that works between university and community groups, has provided a protocol of how to go about researching in collaboration with others. There's a document called Ethics Matters, which poses issues and dilemmas rather than giving sort of straight up principles to follow, which seems like something that's also necessary. In terms of practice, there's a wealth of wider academic literature in sciences and humanities which considers ethics within pedagogical and professional practice through historic case studies and contemporary precedents of practice. And there are some common themes that keep being raised, certain common questions. The first is that global research integrity initiatives are welcomed, but how can we fund, coordinate or disseminate good practice within and between institutions? The second is how funding paradigms are making universities increasingly vulnerable, perhaps, in their role as honest brokers in society. Third is that, which is something that might be quite close to a lot of your hearts, with the heightened pressures that they bring, may instruments such as Research Excellence Framework perversely incentivize academics to cut corners. And finally, how can we address the conflict between research integrity principles and new methods like visual methods or participatory and collaborative approaches, which bring forth issues of partnership and power, blurred boundaries between researcher and research, community rights and conflict, ownership and dissemination of data privacy and confidentiality. Okay, and to the final point, well, it seems like adherence to principle-based or regulatory approaches to ethics or integrity do not go far enough, as, to borrow from Jacques Derrida's spatial metaphor from the future of the profession, the topology of the university is destabilized and mutated by new internal and external forces. Internal forces as new means of funding come into institutions, and external as new methods branch out into the public. And it's striking how often philosophers are actually invoked to address these questions and identify what's at stake at the limit of disciplines, they're inside and outside. So what of thinking in built environment disciplines? Andrew Ballantyne, following Samuel Butler and Gilles Deleuze, argues groups in society develop an ethic as a result of habit, the way they're conditioned or accustomed to behave, rather than through a self-conscious examination of fundamental principles. So to take architecture as an example, if ethics are inferred rather than enforced, an architect's value system is built up over the entire course of their education. Any consideration of ethics should therefore extend beyond policy and guidelines towards the wider teaching environment. What everyday ethics do competitive architectural critics in view when they often prioritise individual originality and self-expression rather than discovery and dialogue with others or design in response to pressing contemporary issues? And Peter Hall, in his final article last year in The Guardian, said, what is needed in education for the built environment is to expose students to the ways of cooperative working to achieve common and productive outcomes. And what of thinking outside of built environment discipline? and Jeremy Till, who's speaking later, issues a plea to move to the consideration of architectures outside, and in particular the ethics of architectures outside. This, he says, is pointedly summarised through Zygmunt Bauman's understanding of ethics. To assume an ethical stance means to assume responsibility for another. So the obvious other is the user of the built environment. And Alan Penn and others have drawn on Aristotle's take on ethical behaviour to argue for architecture to make a turn to integrate user needs in a very different way than it's done previously. This is a concern in common with methods that engage with community groups outside the university. The less obvious other is the producer of the built environment. And here we enter into the sort of wider societal and political territory, such as labour conditions that Zaha Hadid claims is outside of her control and thus concern. And the other is the built environment itself. So Nicholas Ray, in his summation of contributions to his excellent edited volume, proclaims the ethical justification for an ecologically responsible architecture may constitute the most compelling argument for the importance of the profession. And this is echoed in wider scholarship and guidance by professional bodies such as the ICE. There's no means of radical new thought. So philosopher Donna Haraway reminds us that for decades, ecofeminists have perhaps been most insistent on some version of the world as an active subject, not as a resource to be mapped and appropriated. So if the environment is a subject like human and animal participants that UCL's ethical code stringently protect, maybe it should be treated on an equal footing accordingly. Indeed, UCL's mission statement, from which I began the presentation, repeats a commitment to environmental sustainability 3 times. So, for staff and students in built environment disciplines to be fully enabled to handle the specific range of ethical dilemmas they might face, guidance must emerge from a rigorous combination of applied and theoretical knowledge. To conclude, Isabel Stengers, another philosopher of science, writes, Spinoza might say to us, we don't know what a practice is able to become. We know instead that the very way we define or address a practice is part of the surroundings which produces its ethos. So this project must not only question how we define ethics or integrity, it seems, but the built environment itself.